The Stade de France was trembling, not from the roar of the crowd, but from the silence that followed. 52 minutes into the 1998 World Cup semi-final, the unthinkable had just happened. Zinedine Zidane's France, the hosts, the favourites, the team of destiny, had been stunned by a country only 7 years old. On the far side of the pitch, Davor Suker wheeled away, arms outstretched, disbelief written across his face. The net bulged. Fabien Barthez, bald head glistening under the Paris lights, could only turn and watch as Croatia, the first-time World Cup debutants, led 1-0 against the mighty French. For one heartbeat, Saint-Denis went silent. 50,000 people frozen. The impossible had just happened. The underdog had drawn first blood. And then, chaos. The Croatian bench erupted, Miroslav Bležević leaping into the air, waving his trademark cap like a battle flag. Suker was swarmed by his teammates, Prosinecki, Boban, Asanovic, their red and white checkered shirts flashing like sparks against the ocean of blue. But in football, joy and heartbreak often share the same breath. Less than a minute later, Lilian Thuram, a defender who had never scored for France in over 70 appearances, pressed forward, intercepted a pass, and drove a low shot into the corner. The stadium exploded. France were level again. 9 minutes later, it happened again. The same man from the same side curling a shot past Drazen Ladic. Thuram's second goal. Croatia's dream crumbling. France 2, Croatia 1. That was the night the host nation took its step toward history. And Croatia, the outsiders, saw their fairy tale collide with reality. But to reduce that match to a defeat is to misunderstand what it meant. Because on that field, under the Paris floodlights, Croatia won something far more profound than victory. They won recognition. They won belonging. They won the world's respect. 7 years earlier, there was no Croatian flag on the FIFA stage. The world barely knew the name. It was a country still raw from war, buildings shelled, cities scarred, and hearts carrying the weight of loss. For years, Croatians had watched as their nation fought not just for territory, but for identity itself. And yet, through football, they found a way to speak. Through Suker's goals, Bležević's defiant charisma, and the brotherhood forged in locker rooms instead of trenches, Croatia found something to believe in again. The road to that night in Paris began in dust, not glory. It began in makeshift stadiums, with players who had once been teammates now scattered across Europe as refugees and exiles. Some had played under the old Yugoslav flag, others had fled war zones, unsure if they would ever play again. But somehow, they gathered. They rebuilt. Their red and white checkered shirts became a symbol, a pattern born from the Croatian coat of arms, now representing something new, survival through unity. Every pass, every tackle, every goal was more than sport. It was defiance. By the time they arrived in France in the summer of 1998, few outside Zagreb gave them a chance. They were the new kids, untested, inexperienced, expected to enjoy their moment and quietly disappear. The press treated them like an oddity, a curiosity of geopolitics. But Bležević's squad had other ideas. Behind the sunglasses and the cigar, the veteran coach was a master motivator. He called his players "my artists," but demanded soldiers' discipline. He spoke to them like a father, a general, and a believer all at once. "We are not guests at this World Cup," he told them. "We are the storm that will be remembered." And they were. They dismantled Germany in the quarter-finals, 3-0. It wasn't luck, it was dominance. It was Suker's coolness in front of goal, Robert Jani's endless runs, Zvonimir Boban's command in midfield. Each victory was a reminder that this small, wounded nation could not be ignored. So when they faced France in the semi-final, they stood with pride, not fear. And for 52 glorious minutes, the world saw Croatia at its best, daring, intelligent, unafraid. Suker's goal was not just a moment of football brilliance. It was poetry, a rapid counter-attack, a flash of movement, Asanovic's perfect through ball. Suka's delicate touch, and then the finish. Soft, inevitable, immortal. That goal echoed beyond sport. It carried the voice of a people who had been silenced for too long. And when the match ended, 2-1, France triumphant, Croatia's players collapsed on the grass, exhausted, proud, and heartbroken. Yet even in defeat, they were heroes. The world saw it. The commentators saw it. Even the French players, as they exchanged shirts, understood it. For a nation that didn't exist on the football map 7 years earlier, to stand among the final four and to push the hosts to their limits was something miraculous. In the stands, Croatian fans waved flags with tears in their eyes. They had waited generations to see their identity represented on a global stage. That night, they didn't see loss. They saw validation. This was not just a football story. It was a resurrection. Because football, in that moment, became Croatia's language of pride, its proof of endurance. The world would remember Thuram's goals, yes, but they would also remember the team that made France sweat on home soil. They would remember the debutants who refused to bow. Croatia had arrived, and they weren't leaving quietly. Beat. To understand what that meant, how it felt to emerge from the ashes of conflict and play football against the world's best, we need to go back. Back to Osijek, where a young boy named Davor Suker learned to strike a ball against the wall of his family home until dusk. Back to the 1980s, when Croatian players wore blue and white under a flag that wasn't theirs. Back to a time when the dream of independence and the dream of football glory seemed equally distant. Before the roar of the Stade de France, before the golden boot, before the bronze medals, there was struggle. There was exile, and there was belief. This is where the fire was born. Before Davor Suker was a World Cup Golden Boot winner, before the name Croatia appeared on the global stage, there was a boy in Osijek, a city carved by the Drava River, who fell in love with the sound of a football bouncing off concrete. He was born in 1968, in what was then Yugoslavia. Football in that era was the region's great escape. Stadiums were packed, clubs fiercely proud, and the Yugoslav national team was a mosaic of identities, Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Slovenes, playing under one flag. Suker's left foot quickly marked him as a prodigy. Even as a teenager, his touch was silk, his finishing clinical. Local coaches said he didn't strike the ball, he whispered to it. By 17, he was scoring freely for NK Osijek, drawing attention from scouts across the league. His dream was simple: to play, to win, to make his parents proud. But history had other plans. In 1991, the map of Europe began to tear. The breakup of Yugoslavia turned neighbors into enemies overnight. Towns like Osijek became front lines. The stadium where Suker had scored his first goals was suddenly a shelter for refugees. His family lived under shell fire. The boy who once played in peace now trained to the sound of sirens. When Croatia declared independence, footballers like Suker faced impossible choices: stay in the chaos or leave in search of safety and opportunity. He moved to Dinamo Zagreb, the beating heart of Croatian football, but even that club became a symbol of defiance. Every match in Zagreb's Maksimir Stadium was a political act. Fans chanted for freedom, waved forbidden flags, and clashed with riot police. Football wasn't just entertainment, it was rebellion. For many Croatians, Dinamo's blue shirts carried the hope of a nation. And when Suker scored, it felt like resistance itself had found a rhythm. Yet the young forward couldn't escape the war. Like countless others, he became a kind of exile, a footballing refugee. His talent carried him to Red Star Belgrade briefly, then to Spain, where peace and purpose awaited. Sevilla FC became his new home, a city of sunlight and song, far removed from the smoke of the Balkans. There, Suker became a sensation. His elegance, his poise, his unerring instinct for goal, Spain adored him. Commentators called him El Magnifico, but behind every celebration was a man playing for something more. While his teammates thought of trophies, Suker thought of home, of Osijek, of a country still finding its feet. Back in Croatia, amid the rubble, football began to stitch the nation together. The Croatian Football Federation was officially recognized by FIFA in 1992. For the first time, the red and white checkered crest appeared beside the world's great teams. Miroslav Tiro Blažević was appointed as the first national coach, a man with charisma, larger than life, and ambition to match it. Blažević was a showman, part philosopher, part motivator. He believed that Croatia could achieve greatness not in decades, but immediately. "We were born old," he would say, meaning that the nation had suffered enough to know who it was. His players didn't need time, they needed belief. The team he built was a brotherhood. Many had grown up together, scattered across the former Yugoslav league, Zvonimir, Boban, Robert Prosinecki, Slaven Bilic, Igor Stimac, Alkosa Asanovic. Some had been on opposite sides of the old system. Croats, who once shared locker rooms with Serbs, now carried memories of loss. Yet in the red and white shirt, those divisions disappeared. For them, wearing the Croatian crest was more than national duty. It was a promise to show the world that their country was more than headlines of war and ruin. In their early matches, they were raw but fearless. Their style combined Yugoslav flair with something sharper, a new steel born from struggle. They attacked with imagination, defended with fury. Their debut in the UEFA Euro 1996 tournament in England shocked everyone. Drawn against seasoned sides, Croatia advanced to the quarter-finals, beating Denmark and Romania with stunning ease. The world began to take notice. Davor Suker's chip over Peter Schmeichel, a moment of audacious brilliance, became one of the tournament's defining images. For Croatian fans, that goal was more than just art. It was a rival. For years, they'd been seen as the breakaway nation, the upstart. Now, they were contenders. Suker's confidence grew with every match, but so did Blaževic's vision. "We are not underdogs," the coach said. "We are dreamers with discipline." Between 1996 and 1998, Blaževic's team evolved into a perfect blend of artistry and resolve. Boban, the captain, provided leadership forged in the political protests of Zagreb. Prosinecki, the magician of the midfield, could control the game with a single touch. Bilic and Stimac anchored the defense with intellect and aggression. And Suker, the finisher, the calm in chaos, became the symbol of their hope. Yet beneath their growing fame was something deeper, a shared memory of survival. Each player carried a story of loss. Families displaced, friends gone, cities bombed. When they sang the national anthem before matches, it wasn't routine, it was remembrance. Football was the one stage where Croatia could show the world what endurance looked like when dressed in red and white. By 1998, they had earned their ticket to France, their first World Cup. The squad landed on French soil as newcomers, yet they carried the pride of an ancient culture reborn. Opponents and journalists dismissed them as a curiosity, a fresh face in a field of giants. "A nice story," the French press wrote. But they'll be home by the round of 16. They didn't understand what was coming. Because Croatia didn't arrive in France to participate. They arrived to prove something, to their people, to their past, and to the world. Each match would be more than a contest. It would be a message that identity once denied could be reclaimed, one goal, one victory at a time. And leading them, as always, was Davor Suker, the boy from Osijek who turned pain into precision, who carried a nation's hope in his left foot. The stage was set. The storm was gathering, and France, the footballing capital of the world that summer, was about to meet its most unexpected challenger. When Croatia arrived in France in June 1998, they were supposed to be guests, not protagonists. Their very presence was remarkable enough, a brand new nation competing in its first ever World Cup. Most pundits predicted a modest run, a group stage exit, maybe the round of 16 if luck smiled. But Croatia hadn't come to take photographs. They'd come to make history. They began their campaign quietly, tucked away from the spotlight. In Bordeaux, their first match was against Jamaica, another debutante. It was supposed to be a low-stakes affair, a warm-up for the giants to come. But from the first whistle, Croatia's intentions were clear. Miroslav Blazevic's men played like a team possessed, disciplined, structured, and lethal on the break. Robert Prosinecki, the mercurial midfielder once told he was too fragile to make it, in Yugoslavia, reminded the world of his artistry, curling in a glorious opener. Davor Suker added a second. Final score, 3-1. Croatia had arrived, and the world had just been warned. The second match was against Japan, technically superior, endlessly energetic. Croatia struggled early, but again, Suker found the difference, ghosting behind defenders to score the only goal of the match. It was classic Suker, calm, clinical, almost cold. 2 matches, 2 wins. 6 points. Croatia was through to the knockout stage, a feat already beyond most expectations. But it was in their third group match against Argentina that the world truly saw what this new nation was made of. Argentina, led by Gabriel Batistuta and Diego Simeone, were a powerhouse. For long stretches, they dominated possession, their blue and white shirts weaving intricate patterns across the midfield. Yet, Croatia didn't bend. They held their shape, defended like warriors, and attacked with precision. Though they lost narrowly, 1-0, the performance sent a message: this team was no fluke. Still, the critics clung to their doubts. They'll crumble when it matters, one French paper wrote. But inside the Croatian camp, Blažević was molding belief into destiny. Tiro, as everyone called him, was a master of psychology. He had a showman's flair, but a general's mind. He told his players stories before matches, about lions, warriors, saints. He'd pace the locker room, voice rising, eyes flashing with conviction. You are the sons of kings. He would roar. You carry the dreams of those who could not be here. Play like it. And they did. In the round of 16, Croatia faced Romania, a team led by Gheorghe Hagi, the Maradona of the Carpathians. Romania were experienced, dangerous, and familiar with the pressures of the big stage. But Croatia were unshaken. They played with patience, absorbing pressure, waiting for their moment. Near halftime the chance came, a foul in the box, penalty. Suker stepped up. As he placed the ball, the stadium hushed. One slow breath. Then, that effortless left foot. Goal. Croatia advanced. Their story deepened. Each victory added new layers to the myth, and new believers. Back home, in Zagreb, Split and Osijek, streets filled with fans waving the red and white flag. For a nation still healing from war, every match was an act of collective healing. People who had lost everything were suddenly united by one thing: the sight of their team standing tall on the world stage. But what came next would lift the fairy tale into legend. July 4th, 1998. Lyon, the quarter-final. Croatia versus Germany. Germany, the reigning European champions. Ruthless, experienced, cold-blooded. Their lineup was a roll call of football royalty: Matthaus, Klinsmann, Bierhoff, Kahn. Few gave Croatia a chance. For Blažević, that was perfect. In the press conference before the match, he smirked at reporters. The Germans are strong, he said, but they've never played against a heart like ours. That heart showed itself after only 40 minutes, when Christian Warnes was sent off for a desperate foul on Suker. The red card tilted the balance, and Croatia pounced. On the stroke of halftime, Robert Jani lashed home a thunderous shot from outside the box. 1-0. Then came the second half. 45 minutes of football Croatia would never forget. They played with freedom, with rhythm, with joy. Prosinecki glided through midfield like an artist painting in motion. Boban orchestrated the tempo with the calm authority of a general. The defense, Bilic, Stimac, and Simic, refused to be broken. And then came Suker's moment. A looping pass found him on the edge of the box. One deft touch, one swivel, one finish. Pure poetry. 2-0. Moments later, Goran Vlahovic sealed it. 3-0. Germany were stunned. For the first time, Croatia, the nation no one took seriously, had conquered a true giant. It wasn't just victory. It was vindication. The newspapers the next morning told the story simply, Croatia 3, Germany 0. But between those numbers lived something much deeper, the pride of a nation reborn. In Zagreb, car horns blared through the night. Strangers hugged in the streets. Old men wept openly. The war-torn cities of the early 90s had become cities of celebration. For one night, the past didn't hurt. The present was enough. In the Croatian locker room, Blažević stood silently as his players embraced. Then, with a smile, he lifted his cap and said, "Gentlemen, the world sees us now." And they did. In one breathtaking month, Croatia had gone from unknown to unstoppable. Next, they would face France, the hosts, the heroes, the future champions. Zidane, Deschamps, Thuram, a team built to lift the trophy. But Croatia didn't fear them. They had already faced bigger battles. As the team bus rolled toward the Stade de France, the players looked. Out the window at the Paris night, the lights, the flags, the noise. Inside, there was no laughter, no nerves, only quiet focus. Suker sat near the back, headphones on, staring at his boots. He had scored 5 goals already, but he wanted one more, the biggest one. Ahead of him, Blažević turned to his staff and whispered, "They think we are a story. Let's show them we are history." And with that, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic nights in World Cup lore. July 8, 1998. The Stade de France, the cathedral of French football, shimmered under the lights of Saint-Denis. 90,000 fans packed the stands, a sea of tricolour blue, white and red. The air trembled with noise, nerves and destiny. France versus Croatia. The hosts versus the debutants. The old guard versus the new flag. Few expected balance. France were unbeaten, organised, complete, a machine powered by Zidane's grace, Deschamps' control, and the defensive wall of Blanc and Thuram. Croatia, on the other hand, were living a dream, outsiders running on belief, on heart, on the kind of collective magic only underdogs can summon. But Miroslav Blažević didn't care about logic or odds. In the locker room before kickoff, he stood before his players, face stern, cap in hand. "They don't respect us," he said quietly. "They think we're a story. So tonight, we make them remember our name." The players stood still. Suker, Boban, Prosinecki, Stimac, men who had carried their nation from the ashes of war to this, the grandest night of all. They knew what it meant. They had fought for a flag, for identity, for pride. This was more than football. It was Croatia's declaration that they existed, and that they belonged. The whistle blew. The war began. From the opening moments it was clear, Croatia weren't here to survive. They were here to strike. Blaževic's team defended in perfect lines, compact, disciplined, every player tuned to the same rhythm. When France attacked, Croatia countered with lightning speed. Boban and Asanovic threaded passes through the midfield like surgeons. Bilic and Stimac held the back line like generals. And then, in the 52nd minute, it happened. A break, swift as a heartbeat. Asanovic saw the gap and released Suker with a curling pass that cut through the French defence like a blade. Suker, always calm, always calculating, timed his run to perfection. One touch to control, one to finish. The ball rolled past Barthez, 1-0. Croatia. For a second, silence. The Stade de France froze. The impossible had happened. Suker sprinted away, arms out, face lifted to the Paris sky. Behind him, his teammates charged, shouting, laughing, collapsing into each other. On the touchline, Blažević leapt into the air, cap flying from his hand. The Croatian fans, scattered among the blue, erupted into tears and song. The French players looked stunned. Zidane turned, expression blank. Deschamps clapped his hands, trying to rally the team. But for a moment, a fleeting, glorious moment, the world had changed shape. Yet football is cruel, and fate even crueler. Just 60 seconds later, the cheers had barely died when Lilian Thuram, a man who had never scored for France in his entire career, pressed forward. He intercepted a pass at the edge of the box, took a stride, and fired low into the corner. Goal. France 1, Croatia 1. The stadium exploded in sound. French flags waved like flames. The roar was deafening. Thuram stood still for a moment, almost in disbelief, then lifted his finger to his lips, as if silencing destiny itself. Croatia were back at level, but the shock was real. The momentum, that fragile heartbeat of sport, shifted. Still, they fought. Boban urged his teammates forward, Prosinecki gliding past markers with his effortless dribble, Suker searching for space. They pressed, they passed, they hoped, but fate had already written its cruel script. In the 69th minute, Thuram surged forward again. A 1-2 with Henry, a deft touch, a moment of space, and then perfection. The curl, the strike, the net rippling. France 2, Croatia 1. Lilian Thuram, a defender, a quiet scholar of the game, had just scored twice. His only goals for France ever, and they would send his country to the final. On the Croatian bench, silence. Blažević sat motionless, cap in his lap, eyes fixed on the pitch. He knew. His players knew. The miracle was slipping away. Still, they refused to surrender. Prosinecki's free kick forced a save from Barthez. Boban's long-range effort skimmed wide. Late in the match, France were reduced to 10 men after Blanc's red card, but Croatia couldn't find the equalizer. Time ran out, the whistle blew, and with it, the dream. France celebrated. The tricolour flooded the stands. Thuram was embraced by his teammates. Zidane's smile returned, and Deschamps lifted his fists in triumph. They were going to the final, their destiny fulfilled. And yet, amid the French jubilation, there was another story unfolding. As the Croatian players sank to the grass, exhausted and heartbroken, the crowd began to applaud, not mockingly, but with respect. Even the French fans, even their opponents, recognized what they had witnessed. A team born from the ruins of war, in its first ever World Cup, had gone toe-to-toe with the hosts and made them bleed. Blažević rose, adjusted his jacket, and walked calmly to the field. He shook Aimé Jacquet's hand, then embraced his players one by one. "Head high," he whispered. "You've made them remember." For Croatia, the semi-final was more than a loss. It was an awakening. They had proven that greatness isn't inherited, it's earned. That pride can come from pain, that even the smallest nations can shake the giants of the world. That night, France advanced to destiny, and Croatia to immortality. In the press room, journalists scrambled for words. One headline the next morning said it best: Croatia didn't lose. Football won. And perhaps it was true, because when the team returned to their hotel that night, there were no tears, only silence, reflection, and a deep, unspoken pride. Suker sat alone by the window, the lights of Paris glowing beyond. He had scored 6 goals in 6 matches. The golden boot was his. Yet, in his eyes, the glint of victory mixed with what might have been. In the streets below, fans still sang his name. For them, and for their country, that goal, that 50-second-to-minute strike, would never fade. It wasn't the goal that won a World Cup. It was the goal that gave a nation its identity. For most teams, a semi-final loss ends the story. But for Croatia, it was only the beginning of something immortal. The night after the defeat to France, Paris slept under celebration. Fireworks crackled above the Seine. French fans flooded the streets, waving flags, singing La Marseillaise. In a quiet hotel on the outskirts of the city, Croatia sat together, silent, reflective, and strangely calm. They had lost the match. But they hadn't lost their dignity. Blažević gathered his men in the dining room. The clatter of silverware echoed faintly. No one was eating. The coach stood, holding his trademark cap. "My champions," he began, voice heavy with emotion. "We came here to show the world who we are. And tonight, we did. History will not remember the score. It will remember the courage." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Suker, Boban, Prosinecki, Bilic, tired, bruised, hearts still burning. "Now," Blažević continued, "we finish this tournament the way we began it, with pride." That last match, the bronze medal game against the Netherlands, was more than a consolation. It was the test of their soul. The Dutch were another European powerhouse boasting names like Bergkamp, Kluivert, and Seedorf. They too were disappointed, eliminated in the semi-finals by Brazil. For both sides, this was redemption or ruin. On July 11, 1998, in the Parc des Princes, Croatia took the field one last time. The atmosphere was strange, not as charged as the semi-finals but filled with reverence. Everyone knew this was the end of something extraordinary. The whistle blew, and from the very start, Croatia played with the same intensity that had carried them so far. They weren't just playing for a medal. They were playing for their story, for the people watching back home, for those who had rebuilt their towns and lives, for the children waving red and white flags in war-torn villages. 12 minutes in, Robert Prosinecki picked up the ball on the edge of the box. A shimmy, a shift, and a flick, the kind of effortless artistry that made him unplayable when in rhythm. The shot curled past Van der Sar. Goal, 1-0 Croatia. The bench exploded. Blažević clapped slowly, a proud smile breaking through the exhaustion. But the Dutch equalized quickly. Bolo Zenden's pace too much to contain. For a moment, it seemed the fairy tale might fade quietly. Then, in the 36th minute, it happened. One last spark. A long Croatian move, precise and patient, carved open the Dutch defense. The final ball came to Davor Suker. He took a touch, looked up, and waited for Van der Sar to move. Then, with that same left foot that had written history all summer, he slid the ball calmly into the net. 2-1. Suker ran to the corner flag, kissing the Croatian badge on his chest. Behind him, teammates piled on, laughing, shouting, alive again. It was the perfect ending, the poetic closure to a story born in chaos and crowned in beauty. When the final whistle blew, Croatia had secured third place. Bronze medals, but pure gold in meaning. In that moment, the checkered flag of Croatia flew proudly among football's elite. The players embraced, tears mixing with sweat, as Blažević lifted his cap toward the sky. He looked older, worn, but fulfilled. That night, the team returned to Zagreb as heroes. What awaited them wasn't a quiet welcome. It was a homecoming for the ages. Over 100,000 people filled Ban Jelačić Square. The noise was deafening, the flags endless. From balconies, from rooftops, from every window, people waved and cheered. For a country of just 4 million, the celebration was seismic. When the players appeared on the balcony, the square erupted. Suker stepped forward, bronze medal around his neck, golden boot in hand. He raised it high, not as a personal triumph, but as a symbol. This, he said later, was for everyone who believed when belief seemed impossible. The golden boot was no small feat. Suker's 6 goals had made him the top scorer of the 1998 World Cup, ahead of Ronaldo, ahead of Batistuta, ahead of the world's finest strikers. He wasn't the tallest, the fastest, or the strongest. But in France, he was the most precise. He carried not just a football, but the hopes of a nation on his shoulders. And what he carried, he delivered. For Blažević, the bronze was his masterpiece. He had taken a team built from fragments of a fallen country and molded it into a unit the whole world admired. His press conferences were filled with swagger and poetry, But beneath it all lay a deep patriotism. He loved his players like sons, and they loved him back like a father. Football, he told the reporters that night, is not about how many trophies you win, it's about how many hearts you touch. He wasn't wrong. Croatia's run in 1998 touched millions. It wasn't just a sports story. It was a human story. A story of how identity can be rebuilt through passion, how pride can rise from pain, how even the smallest nation can shake the pillars of power. For Suker, the journey had been deeply personal. From the war-torn streets of Osijek to the world's grandest stage he had carried. A memory with him, of friends lost, of homes destroyed, of dreams deferred. Every goal was a whisper to them, every victory a tribute. As he stood on that balcony in Zagreb, looking over the crowd that chanted his name, Suker smiled. He wasn't just a footballer anymore, he was a symbol. Proof that Croatia existed, not just politically, but spiritually. The bronze medal, the golden boot, the pride of a nation, all born from the same fire. Croatia had come to France as a question. They left as an answer, and that answer would echo through generations, long after the cheers faded and the medals dulled with time. When the fireworks faded and the medals were tucked away, Croatia woke, up to something they'd never known before, the feeling of being seen. The world had watched their run in disbelief, then in admiration. A nation younger than most of its players had stood among football's giants and refused to bow. They hadn't just played matches, they had told a story. In 1998, Croatia didn't win the World Cup, but in the hearts of millions, they won something deeper. The red and white checkers, once dismissed as a novelty, became a badge of courage, of identity. For years, Croatia had been defined by the headlines of war, the ruins of cities like Vukovar, the scars of separation. But in France, they had written a new narrative, one of resilience, beauty, and unity. When the team returned home, children began to dream differently. They no longer dreamed of leaving, they dreamed of representing. Every dusty pitch, every backstreet goal, carried a new kind of pride. Football, once an escape, had become a mirror of national rebirth. For Davor Suker, the hero of that summer, life changed forever. The golden boot was his crown, his left foot immortalized in the annals of the sport. Yet behind the fame, there was a quiet humility. He often said later that he never played for personal glory. Every goal, he would tell journalists, was for the people who couldn't celebrate with us, the ones who gave us the chance to have a flag. Suker went on to play for Arsenal and West Ham, but his legend would never surpass that summer. His 6 goals in France remain one of the most poetic Golden Boot campaigns in world. Cup history, precision, calm, timing and courage all woven into one man's journey. And Miroslav Blažević, the charismatic Ciro, became a national father figure. He'd given Croatia more than tactics or victories. He'd given them belief. The man who waved his cap like a general became a symbol of hope. When he passed away decades later, tributes poured in not just from Croatia, but from every corner of the footballing world. They remembered the charm, the quotes, the passion, but above all, they remembered the fire he lit in 1998. The players of that golden generation became mentors, leaders, legends. Zvonimir Boban joined FIFA and helped shape the game globally. Slaven Bilic became a manager, leading Croatia with the same intensity he'd shown as a defender. Prosinecki, the artist of the midfield, passed on his touch to a new wave of dreamers. But perhaps the greatest legacy of all was what came after, because that bronze medal planted a seed, one that would bloom 2 decades later. In 2018, 20 years after Suker's run in France, another Croatian team stood in another World Cup final, this time in Moscow. Luka Modric, born during the war that tore his homeland apart, captained his country to the biggest stage in world sport. And when Modric lifted the golden ball, the world remembered where it all began. In 1998, when Croatia dared to believe they belonged, the threads between those generations were invisible but unbreakable. Every pass, every tackle, every tear in Moscow traced its roots back to the fire lit in Saint-Denis. Football historians often talk about systems, formations, tactics. But Croatia's rise can't be explained by those. It was emotional alchemy. Pain turned into pride, struggle into skill, defiance into art. The 1998 team didn't just change Croatian football. They changed how the world saw small nations. They proved that greatness doesn't require a population of millions or a century of history. It only requires a purpose and the courage to chase it, even when no one believes you can. Every great football story carries an echo, a lesson that lives beyond the match. For Croatia, that echo was unity. Men who had once been divided by borders and war came together under one crest, one anthem, one dream. They showed that identity is not something given, it's something earned through sweat, belief, and shared struggle. Even now, when the World Cup rolls around and Croatia take the field, you can feel the ghost of 1998. In every player's step, in every fan's song, in every flash of those checkered shirts, there is a whisper of Suka's goal, of Blazevic's grin, of that moment when the world stood still. France may have won the trophy, but Croatia won something no one can engrave in silver, the soul of the tournament. Their third-place finish remains one of the greatest debut campaigns in football history. A miracle forged not in luxury, but in survival. And as years turned into decades, their story aged like myth, passed from one generation to the next. Parents who watched it live still tell their children, "I remember when we were new, and we made the world believe." That's what legacy means. It's not the scoreline, it's not the medal, it's the memory that outlives them both. Because when Davor Suker lifted that golden boot to the Paris sky, it wasn't just for Croatia. It was for every small nation that ever dreamed too big. For every team told they weren't ready. For every player who came from rubble, not privilege. In that summer of 1998, Croatia didn't just play football. They wrote a chapter in the mythology of sport, a story about the courage to exist and the grace to dream. And somewhere deep in the echoes of that night in Saint-Denis, you can still hear the sound of Suka. Strike, the roar of a new nation finding its voice, and the whisper that will never fade. We were small, but we were mighty.